Keep messing up these times.
Right.
Welcome back, gentle listeners, to Philosophy for the People.
Welcome
comrades.
back, comrades.
Gentle comrades.
Citizens.
We missed Marxist Monday, so we're here for Woke Wednesday.
Woke Wednesday.
Continuing our series on one-dimensional man. And we got to show the picture on the back. The Herbert Marcuse, his cozy little picnic. And when you read this book, Jim, do you take a little blanket out front?
Yeah, I pull the blanket out backyard. I, spread out. I read. I hope that a medieval, peasant will come by.
Right. I mean, like it is appropriate, right, to like do different philosophical reading in different environments. I've always had that mindset, right?
Right, exactly.
Anyway, all right, so we're on chapter 6, right?
Yeah.
We are cruising through. This, so before we dive into this, Jim, are there any summary considerations or reminders we want to give before we tackle this section?
Yeah, well, let's as always, let's situate it in the table of contents, right? This is one of my mantras to my students is, the most important part of the book is the table of contents, because it you have to understand the trees to the forest, right?
This is Adler, man.
Yeah, exactly.
He's big on this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I remember I took a bizarre course when I was at Kent State on, it was like the first year philosophy seminar for graduate students. And they would have us do crazy stuff like read the index of the book first, and obviously the table of contents, or like and like look like read a book, starting with the last chapter and work your way back through and stuff like that. And it was bizarre. It was crazy. There was some postmodern nonsense going on in some of it, but overall, I think it really taught me the importance of structure in a book, and that like nothing is accidental in the structure of a good book, right?
So in a good book, that's the key. Good book. Yeah, and Adler talks about that, right? And that's why he has his level of inspectional reading. You start with inspectional reading, and you do a lot of. You don't necessarily start from the end, but yeah, Adler will say in a good book there is nothing accidental about the structure, right?
Exactly. Or you can get like the Straussian thing, and like you have to find the central paragraph the entire book, and that will tell you what the real story is, right?
But, right.
Anyway, we don't have to go into that now. All right, I'm interested though to find a central paragraph of One-Dimensional Man, right?
Yeah, there's a few that really stood out to me, at least in this chapter, but that would be a good thought exercise. The essential paragraph in this. Yeah. Anyways,
maybe we'll do that for the recap episode of the whole thing.
Yeah, cool. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you look at last time we did, we're in the section of the book called One-Dimensional Thought, and in the first section was One-Dimensional Society, and that was like really his own speculative sociology of why the revolution didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the reason the revolution didn't happen is society, structurally adjusted itself that it could absorb all possible contradictions, right? And how did it do that? It did that by really a technological kind of control over thought. All right. And that then raises the second section of the book, one-dimensional thought. So what is this new thought, right? That is the product of this overall technological control of everything. Okay. And so in chapter 5 now, in the first chapter of one-dimensional thought, we got negative thinking, right? The defeated logic of protest. So that would be, what would it be like to have thought that was not itself oppressed by this technological attitude, which we're going to get into what he means by the technological attitude today. Okay, but what was real thinking like? Okay, and his two primary examples of it are Plato's dialectical thought primarily in the Republic, and Aristotle, in as much as he's proceeding in dialectical ways. Now, he does have some worries about Aristotle's formal logic and all that. And then the other example was Hegel, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, the Hegelian dialectic. Okay, and now we're moving to chapter 6, right, which the title is From Negative to Positive Thinking, Technological Rationality and the Logic of Domination. Okay, so now what is it? What he did in chapter 5 is not how he thinks we think today, right? And in chapter 6, he kind of wants to do a phenomenology of how it is we actually think today. Like, what are the conditions of our thinking today? Okay. Okay, we'll talk about what's going to go in the next chapter, but there's the structure of what's going on here. Okay?
Yeah. Very good summary. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And now I'll say this is, okay, of the chapters in this book, and all along I've been, hey, look, my stance toward Marcuse is, increasingly like 90% agreement, but like crucial 10% disagreement, right? Okay, when you get into chapter 6 here, I think I'm down to like 99% disagreement, or 99% agreement and like 1% disagreement.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
A lot of the stuff in this chapter are like pretty central elements to like the way I approach a lot of stuff today.
Yeah, because I mean he's going after sort of Cartesianism, the quantification of nature, right? And you know, for people like us who hold a strong romance over the classical Greek picture of the world, we can strongly nod in agreement with a lot of this.
Strongly nod,
Yep.
And once again, this theme comes up, throughout One-Dimensional Man, of which I agree with like deeply, is that like there isn't a politics without a metaphysics, and there isn't a metaphysics without a politics, right?
Right.
We may just disagree deeply with Marcuse's preferred metaphysics, but he's letting you see that you can't separate the properly philosophical from the practical.
Right. Yeah. And this is so true. Everything's connected. Everything matters. I said that in a podcast, I think yesterday. It's so true. Yeah. It's true. You cannot. No, we said that with Bogardus, right? It's like, look, you can kind of contemplate issues sort of in isolation for a little while, and we're talking about normativity. That's right. But at the end of the day, right, it is going to have to get back out. It's going to have to go beyond itself, beyond that sort of isolated context, if we're going to really make something fully intelligible. Right. 100%.
Yeah. And that's why this book, whatever we want to say about the ultimate position he's going to come to, and it's going to, we're going to have much to say about that later.
Yeah.
Right?
We might part ways at the barn orgy, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah. The barn orgy is not, let's face it, we're squares. All right. So we're pretty square. That's not our show. Right. If you want that, there's other channels.
Right. Yeah. Too many other channels.
Yeah. We're actually trying to swim up against that current. Right. Okay. But I digress. Whatever I was wanting to say about where this ultimately ends up and like what his positive view is, I think increasingly I'm being reminded that this book is a philosophical masterpiece, and it's a tour de force. It really is. Yeah. For what it is a great instance of its kind. Right.
Yeah.
And from the standpoint of just like philosophical appreciation, like in the sense of like musical appreciation, there is much to appreciate in like what he's doing here and pulling things together and all that.
Undoubtedly. Right.
Yeah. And so now let's should we just go into 6 now?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. And something he more or less says this is, remember, there's 3 elements to Marcuse's thought. Like there's 3 things in most really important thinkers are not utterly original. In fact, I don't think there's really been an utterly original thinker ever, right? It's always, people who can synthesize things that were not prior synthesized, and then thereby add new variations on the theme, and then take our thinking forward, right? And the elements that Marcuse is pulling together, right, are the Freudian psychoanalysis, which we've talked about how that works in the desublimation, really the creepy parts, right, of the book. Classical Marxist theory, all right, and phenomenological considerations, especially German phenomenological considerations, right? Because he did study under Heidegger briefly, and this chapter is full of references to Heidegger, and he actually gives you a pretty good summary of Husserl's Crisis of European Sciences, or parts of it. And by the way, that book, Husserl's Crisis of European Sciences, I highly recommend. And both as like maybe a good starting point for kind of an easier entry point for phenomenology, and is something that's like critically important to understanding who we are and how we should go forward, right? So maybe someday that'll be a taller, but someday maybe down the road we'll do a read on that, right?
No, why not, man? Why not?
Right? Yeah, philosophy of the people is ever deeper, man. Like,
yeah, and now the gentle comrades, excuse me. You can help us out, of course, by liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, all that, and we will do some Q&A at the end. So if you guys have any questions or comments, please submit them.
Yep.
Okay, Jim, back to you.
All right, so back in. All right, so one of the things I want to emphasize, because it's a theme throughout, and it's probably most interesting to you and I and our in the comrades. That might become our official name for the listeners from now on, the comrades, right? Is Marcuse emphasizes, as he did in the prior chapter, in this chapter at the start, that the multidimensional thinking that was lost in the transition to modernity, right? And like tried to be resurrected in like Hegel and people like that, was this idea of like there is not a fact value distinction, that nature is suffused with final causes, and therefore nature is something that is inherently in and of itself normative, right? And Marcuse, and I would say rightly, like says, you cannot separate the notion of finality, intention, purpose in nature from normativity. Okay, right. Interesting. This came up yesterday.
It's exactly what came up yesterday.
And it's interesting. Marcuse recognizes this. Like like if you think nature has any kind of intentional structure whatsoever, you've got a natural normativity here. Okay. And he thinks what has happened, most important in modernity, is that notion of there being value written into nature in and of itself, right? Has been destroyed. And then now we are left with a nature that has no value in of itself. And we don't just mean value in the sense of like we should respect it. We do mean that, but also it provides us no norms.
Yeah.
Right. It provides us no norms. And this is a very important theme. And as you know, it's like one I've obsessed with.
Yeah, I want to spend some time on this. Yeah. Right.
Is this notion, like you see it in Max Weber, right? In the early modern period, you see it, Hegel is seeing this, even Nietzsche is seeing this. They're saying, look, what's happened is we have utterly disenchanted nature. We do not see nature as having a value in and of itself, nor providing us with any kind of norms whatsoever. Right. And so what that was, and this is so central to understanding Heidegger's thought. What that does is it then provides us with this sense that we are untethered, right, from any kind of normativity whatsoever, right? And that nature is there for our consumption and control, period, full stop, right? And, this is Heidegger's point, and this is, you find this in C.S. Lewis, right? Like, I think every smart person in the early 20th century, late 19th century, had an oh shit moment. Like, what have we done? Right. And now we look at nature as something, because it has no inherent normativity. It's something that's there for our consumption and control. And oh, wait, by the way, we're a part of nature too.
Right.
So inevitably human beings will become grist for that same machine. Right. Like literally like in gas chambers and abortion clinics, but also in more subtle ways, and just our lives, ourselves, our self-conceptions will be managed and manipulated like any other piece of otherwise indifferent, normless nature. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like a chunk of prime matter.
Of prime matter. Yeah. I think a great, I encourage people to watch the Charlton Heston film, Soylent Green, right? Where it's this dystopian, actually environmentalist, like bleak futuristic film, where it turns out like, so everybody's being fed this like very cheap hyper palatable food called Soylent Green, right? Spoiler alert, it turns out it's human beings.
Right.
Okay. All right. Now like the metaphor of the film though, I think is just like, look, like where we're going is to see human beings as just one more thing that is just exists as a kind of prime matter that has no natural, formal, or teleological
determinate structure, right?
No determinate structure of its own, that we do no violence to by reconfiguring according to our whims.
Yeah. Right? So let's unpack this a little bit, because this is absolutely critical, and I agree with you. I mean, that we should agree with Marcuse here, right? Yeah. This is what happened. This is the problem, right?
Because what Marcuse is doing here, he's reporting in very high, like academic circles, what Husserl is saying, what Heidegger is saying, right? And really even going back like to what Nietzsche was saying, but Nietzsche's like, let's get it on, okay, right? But let's go and control everything. But anyway, he's reporting, but even in like, in more popular circles, like C.S. Lewis is saying this, Huxley's saying this, like every smart person.
Yeah, Abolition of Man. If people haven't read Abolition of Man,
is the one to read. and it's like everyone, like Husserl's writing the Crisis of European Sciences in the 1930s, right? Because he's sitting after World War I, and he's looking at World War II coming down the pipe, and he's saying, "Oh my God, soil and greenest people. Here's where we're going."
Right. Yeah. So let me, because there's obviously multiple ways to analyze this, but he does focus on the quantification of nature. I think this is going to be an important aspect. So just to read a little bit from Marcuse, and then we can comment. He says the quantification of nature, which led to its explication in terms of mathematical structures, separated reality from all inherent ends, and consequently separated the true from the good, science from ethics. All right, so that's a really good point, because what we're doing.
I highlighted that one too. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Because that just chops off final causality, right? And that just chops off sort of teleology. And I think the general line here, and we agree with this, is that somebody took a method and they turned it into a metaphysics. That was the mistake, right? Somebody took a scientific method, which is very powerful for making predictions and forming technology, but they turned the method into the metaphysics, right? They bracketed it off for the sake of methodology, certain considerations, formal and final causality, right? Sort of brought things down into a restricted notion of efficient causality, and then use a sort of tool, a very powerful tool that's really good at capturing certain aspects of reality, right? Those aspects that can be described mathematically, but then falsely, I think everyone would argue, including Marcuse, concluded that those are the only aspects of reality, right?
Right.
And an analogy that's sometimes given here, I think it's a good one, is like, this is as foolish as thinking that because a metal detector is really good at detecting metal, that there's no such thing as plastic, because it doesn't pick up plastic.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that it's just because the method is powerful and can do things and tell us stuff doesn't mean that should be our metaphysics, right? Just because your method doesn't account for or doesn't include final causality doesn't mean that there aren't any ends, right? That extra move is an incredible leap and jump.
Right.
Now we can argue about that, but people have made that jump, and that's the problem. And as soon as that jump is made, as soon as ends are no longer recognized, as soon as teleology is out, as soon as final causality is out, it's just prime matter, right?
It's prime matter.
It's just prime matter.
And this 100% well put. And this is where I think Husserl's work in the Crisis of European Sciences is so very important, because he gives you, it comes at a cost. It's a hard, tedious story, but he gives you a very, very detailed historical story of how this comes about, right? It's worth the trip, though. And what he points out is like, look, geometry was originally a practical discipline, not a theoretical discipline. It was like geometry, measuring the earth, right? Measuring the earth for the purposes, like for agricultural and architectural purposes. It was an applied science, okay? But it presupposed, in its original form, like before even Euclid, right, that we were dealing with real beings here that had value, right? And it was constrained by the teleological, what you would use it for was constrained by the teleological structure of things and all that, right? Okay. But with Galileo, what we have now, by the time we get to Galileo, I don't want to, it's always wrong to like pin world historical events on the thought of one human being, right? They're expressions. Okay.
Poor Galileo, poor Occam, poor Luther,
poor Descartes, right? I mean, you know what I mean, right? And then you could say lucky people too, like but what happens with the Galilean revolution is you have a notion of geometry utterly untethered from the real embodied things that we're dealing with, okay? But becomes predictively effective.
Yes.
Okay. And so now, we're just going to discard, set aside the real attributes of the things that we're discussing, like as we encountered them in our real life world. Lebenswelt is a very important word for Husserl on this. Okay. We're going to set all that aside and just look at the purely quantitative geometric properties of them. Right. And Husserl's very point out, but that's not even the origin of geometry. Geometry began dealing with the real things in the Lebenswelt. But now what we've done is we artificially separate these things. So you've got the qualitative, value laden aspects of things, and you get the purely quantified properties, and these are one and the same thing, or these are utterly distinct realms. So now we're dualists at least, right? And but still geometry is still practical ultimately. And so once I understand these geometric properties of things, I can make predictions about them, and I thereby can control them, right? That's the thing, is it allows control for us. All right. And I'm not saying it's false. I mean, but it's about it is looking at purely the controllable aspect of reality, right? That part of reality that we can get our hands around and manipulate because we can understand the mathematics, leaving aside the teleology, leaving aside the value, leaving aside the qualitative aspects, right? And now if you look at your major figures in the original philosophy of science behind the scientific revolution, right? What does Francis Bacon say? He's like, look, here's the deal. We're going to make a new Eden because now we know how to control nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like he says it, we're going to make a new Eden, right? We will reconfigure this thing in our own likeness and image to make it, build it back better, baby. Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No. Okay.
Not yet, Jim. Not yet.
Okay. Right. Okay. And what does Descartes say? Descartes says in the Discourse on Method, right? That what this is about, he says the new physics is about, is the mastering and commanding of nature.
That's right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay. So now theory and practice, like they've always been intertwined, and they still are. But what we have now is a very, very truncated theory, a theory that only talks about one aspect of things, and namely the one that is practical. So we've really lost the distinction entirely, right? And now we see nature and eventually ourselves as the plaything of our whim because we have the technological power to do it now.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And Marcuse is hitting that, but once again, it's like everybody smart has seen this.
Right. And, maybe we should just say a few other things. I mean, there are, we don't want to say that the quantification of nature, right, is itself something that's obviously hasn't been fruitful. I don't think there's, but
as we speak over the internet, right?
Right. Yeah. Just to say that because something works, therefore that's the end of the story, or that's all there is one of the worst arguments I've ever heard. Right. And but that is an argument that even professional philosophers will give in favor of this type of worldview of this man. Well, it just works. Well, nobody disagrees that it works, buddy. Like, but why should I take that these sort of equational relationships that you give are exhaustive? That's the question, right? Yeah. And the answer is they cannot be exhaustive. And you're never going to be able to get teleology completely out of the picture. I mean, reason is teleological, right? Yeah. You couldn't even give an argument. Reason points, right? It's directed at inferences, right? So like you couldn't even possibly give an argument against teleology without, of course, already assuming it, already working with it, right? Uh-huh.
And this is, the brilliance of like the beginning half of Heidegger's Being and Time. That's not to say there's some brilliance in the back half, but like this is the specific thing going on there. This is the brilliance of Husserl's many things, but especially the crisis of European sciences. This is I think Marcuse is doing a good job of pulling all together all these people, right? What they're all arguing is, look, what has happened is we have gone so far down this, Baconian, Cartesian, Galilean rabbit hole of obsessing over one aspect of reality, namely the one that is most useful to us.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a real aspect of reality. Like no one is saying like, Heidegger will even say like technology is a revealing of being. Being is that way, but it's also other ways. And we've become just myopically obsessed with this such that if you talk to people who have only marinated themselves in this kind of thinking and you say, well, you're just talking about what's useful and not just also like what is real, they don't even they don't know what you're talking about.
They don't they really, the fact value distinction is a good example, right?
Yeah.
Because certainly for an Aristotelian, broadly speaking, this doesn't even make sense, right? Because to understand the facts about anything fully, we'll understand what it's pointed at, right?
Yeah.
So there is no distinction between fact and end or value for an Aristotelian, right? It's only for the person who has been raised in and lived in this desiccated worldview that you could even kind of fool yourself into thinking that might be a possibility to begin with. Right?
Mm-hmm. And this is why also, like all those texts I mentioned, all those authors I mentioned, they point out there's a deep inconsistency operating here because even the natural scientist has to live and move and breathe in the Lebenswelt as it actually shows up to us in our common experience of reality to pull off what he or she is doing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is a physical, practical thing that has to go on in setting up an experiment. Right. Mm-hmm. And promulgating to other people, the scientist has to step in and out of the ordinary Lebenswelt and the sort of like constructed Lebenswelt that is science, right, or the structured world that is science, all the time. Like this is Herbert Dreyfus's and Charles Taylor's great example. Is if you want to ask somebody, go to the next room and measure, like determine whether the painting is hung straight or crooked or not, right? Look, that's a calculable, quantified activity. Is like, applying like a level to that and getting a number out of it. But think of all, like, to make that a coherent request of someone, like all the things you have to presuppose that they understand about reality, like how to work a doorknob, knowing whether it's polite to just walk in the room or you should knock or not, right? There's all these teleological value-laden things that you have to presuppose to get to the point of the quantified measurement, right? And the quantified measurement would have it would be inarticulable, incoherent, meaningless babble to us if we didn't presuppose all of the other stuff in the background as we arrive to it.
Speaking of, I wonder if that book, or at least maybe a few chapters of that book, would be worthy of a series as well.
Oh, the Retrieving Realism.
Realism.
Yeah, by Dreyfus. Yeah, by all means. That would be fun.
I'm going to put a note down for that in the queue.
Yeah, right. I think that's also I think that is it's written by two high-level professional philosophers, published by Harvard University Press. It's like a very, very rigorous press, but it's also, I think, a very, very good non-specialist introduction to these issues.
Yeah,
right. That would be pretty accessible to the audience.
Right.
So, yeah.
One other thing I want to point out here is, again, he does mention Thomistic philosophy at some point, which is kind of cool and interesting. And
he's more sympathetic to it than you think he's going to be.
Well, I'm going to say, like, despite what our substantial disagreements with Marcuse is like, I don't think I've detected an area where I think that he's like completely off or he's cartooned anything. I don't think so.
No. Can I hit something on that real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So over on page 148.
Yeah, that's where I was at. I was about to get into what I think he's about to talk about, what I would call sort of broad structural realism that he seems to be getting at. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in the middle of the first full paragraph of 148, he says, in terms of scientific reason, they remain matters of preference, and no resuscitation of some kind of Aristotelian or Thomistic philosophy can save the situation, for it's a priori refuted by scientific reason. So what he's saying here is, the notion of the good, the beautiful, peace, justice, the forms. Now we just jettison them, and that's just subjectivity. That's just value. It's just in your head, right? All this stuff. It's not in the real world, because the real world is this mathematical construction that we can manipulate. Okay. Mm-hmm. And he says, and of course, like it's interesting. Like Marcuse does not agree with that. Okay, because like any Marxist.
Yeah, I read him as reporting this, not endorsing it.
Yeah,
if he's endorsing this, then I have a problem, right?
Because he's like, any Marxist needs. This is why McIntyre left Marxism and eventually ends up becoming a Thomist, like through Aristotle. He just realized that in order to sustain the Marxist critique, you need a strongly normative nature, right, on which to base it. Right.
Can't just be working with prime matter. That's right.
Can't just be working with prime matter, right? Because you're saying there's a point of human flourishing, and we're not getting there because of our bad social structure, right?
Real quick, I do see in our future a tub, maybe 2 or 3 pounds, Philosophy for the People protein called prime matter.
Call it Soylent Green.
We'll have 2, one with caffeine, one without. Prime matter and Soylent Green. People, you let us know if you'll be willing to support that project, and we'll start.
That would be us.
Yeah. Direct drop shipping prime matter straight to your house. Jacked.
We should talk to Mike to see if he would do prime matter weight
guys, we're just gonna white label this, please.
Yeah.
Please. But it'll be good, and it'll be prime matter and Soylent Green, and you guys will buy it.
You'll buy it.
Just had to put that out there.
Yeah, I like let it be written, let it be done. Right. Okay, so. And when he says here, like, he doesn't think an Aristotelian Thomistic resuscitation of this is possible. Okay, and And in some ways, I agree with him. Okay, because this is my whole point about how I think a lot of Thomists out there and Aristotelians out there are claiming not to be Cartesian, but they still are. Okay, they're falling into these like they're still taking something like the natural scientific construction of nature as the norm, and then showing how well we can fit our view into that. We don't have to like monkey with that at all, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think, and this is what I'm trying, like it's going to take a long sort of phenomenological purging of the Cartesian view, right? Like we have to like I think submit to this kind of like phenomenological therapy to like try to recover what would it be like to think about nature as enchanted. Okay, because I do think that is Hamas's view. I do definitely it's Aristotle's view of an enchanted nature.
I agree,
but I don't think we can just say it's just naive hermeneutically to think that we can be 21st century people and say, oh yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and like think about nature as enchanted now, without like really purging modernity from our souls in a way, right? Yeah. And I think what you get is a lot of attempts at appeals to classical philosophy just become, and this is Marcuse's point, the brilliant way that this technological mindset can just incorporate anything and change it into what it wants it to be. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I love your line of, hey, if you're going to stop being a Cartesian, then stop being a Cartesian.
Stop being a Cartesian. Yeah.
Which is how John Henry Newman always talk about. He's like, I look back on my life, and he's like, it's just my entire life is just me trying to stop being a liberal. Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly. It's just like, and realizing that I kept failing. Right. Thinking, I thought I'd done it. Nope. Had further to go. Thought I'd done it. Nope. Had further to go.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm not saying to pull off fully, but I do think it's going to take a lot of hard work to rethink the whole damn thing from the bottom, to think your way out of it, so then you can get back into the original. Right. We need a beginning. We need to get back to we need kind of a new beginning with this. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so he talks a little bit about, and this might be a little redundant here, but I'm reading this as him trying to make the right claim that hey, we shouldn't read metaphysics off of a method. Right. What do the sciences really give us? What does physics and chemistry really give us? And it seems to me that he's kind of hinting at a position that I think is probably the best position, which would be something like an epistemic structural realism, right?
Yeah.
Hey, and then he quotes Max Born here. Often sort of the measurable quantities we get are not the properties of a thing, but the properties of its relations to other things, right?
Right.
That's really important, right? And Bertrand Russell was big about this. He's like, yeah, we get, these sort of mathematical descriptions, but what are they the structure of? What are the things themselves, right? To that, physics is silent was kind of Russell's kind of famous line, right? So the point there is like, it seems like the right posture to hold towards this is, yes, predictively useful, technologically useful, but not exhaustive, right? And you could maybe just be an instrumentalist and just be like, nah, I just don't think it really gives us anything real. Or you could be a sort of a structural realist and like, yeah, it captures some aspects of reality, but far from all aspects of reality, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we this once again kind of came up yesterday, and I don't think I articulated it well, but Heidegger has this view that being is polyvalent, and I think this is the same for Husserl, and we hear that in like the kind of Aristotelian realist world, we freak out, right? Because it sounds like he's a relativist. Well, yes and no. What he's saying is that there's a number of ways reality can manifest itself to us, right? Okay, and it will be our practical dispositions toward it that are that's gonna maybe decide how it manifests itself to us. And so no one's saying that like what you get through the Galilean method isn't real, okay? But the point is that the most fundamentally real, and even before that, is that the only real, okay? And I think we have to say it is not the only real, and it's not even the most fundamentally real, because we have to presuppose this Lebenswelt of value for us to even get the Galilean project off the ground in the first place.
Yeah, right.
That is like, to me, is the big, dynamite point that we should take from these phenomenologists. Right.
Yeah. Spot on. Good. Okay, so we hit the point I wanted to hit. What else you got for us, Jim?
I think that summarizes the check. Can I go off a little bit on another author?
Please.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So, you and I have both been looking at some of the stuff by Philip Goff on panpsychism. Okay. And he was on Rogan, and I in a lot of ways he has a book called Galileo's Error, which resonates a lot with this chapter. Okay. And I have, as you know, I admire that book. I think it's a very good introduction to a lot of these issues. Okay. But it shows a really key error here. And it shows why someone like Marcuse would say someone like Goff is himself, despite his own socialism, playing into the capitalist machine. Okay. Because when someone like what Goff does is he says, look, Galileo divides reality between the quantitative properties of things and what he calls the subjective properties of things. Okay. And this has led to this mind-body problem that's intractable, and it's not insoluble, and it's insolvable. And what we have to do now is just sort of like read the subjectivity back into nature.
Okay. And good thing the church decapitated him.
Yeah, good thing the church decapitated. Yeah, exactly. Right. And the thing is this shows a really, really truncated understanding of what was actually lost with Galilean science, because like someone like Goff, who's coming at this entirely through contemporary analytic philosophy, the only divide is between like subjective qualia, these just pure feels, right? And he shows no interest in like returning normativity to nature.
That's right.
He has no interest in returning teleology to nature. It's just, hey, there's this hard problem of consciousness. We can't figure out how the heck we can have pure qualitative tastes like chocolate, feels like sex, right? Right. Right. I mean, without returning mind to world that way. Well, what an utterly infantile view of what mind is. Okay. Mind is normativity. It's not feeling.
Yes, right. And that's why we talked about this before, where it's the feeling, the quality. Okay, interesting, fair enough. But the really interesting thing about mind is its directedness, its intentionality, and reason itself, rationality. That's why rationality was at the heart of how Aristotle and Aquinas were thinking about mind, not qualia. You'll never find a term qualia in either of these guys' thinking, right? Well, it's a modern term for one, but
look, go ahead and show me Aristotle dealing with the qualia problem at any point in De Anima. The closest you will come is he says, hey, is anger an emotion, or is it heat around the heart? And he says, yeah, it depends how you look at it. It's not he is not obsessed with it, because qualitativity, right, is not the important part of nature for Aristotle, right? Subjectivity is not the important thing about soul, right? It's disposition to the good and the true. That's the important part about nature, right? As Marcuse points out here, like these guys saw nature as running on logic and love, right? And there wasn't a division. Like Aristotle thought the way the unmoved mover moved things is nature loves it, right? Not in a sense of like, feels like sex love, right? In the sense of it is disposed to pursue it for its sake, right? And so it's like someone like Goff, hey, we've got this hard problem of consciousness. The easy problem of consciousness is rationality and normativity, right? Okay. And we're just going to say that's just quantitative stuff, right? Because there is no normativity at all, right? But once again, it seems to me like this is really selective what we're worried about in terms of what was lost in the Galilean Revolution.
That's a good point.
And it ignores the fact that you cannot. I know this is like one of your stalking horses for good reasons. You cannot ground like the very notion of scientific normativity unless you write normativity into nature in and of itself, and we're part of a normative nature. Do you see that, right? And this is Husserl's point, Heidegger's point, all these people's points, is that you're going to like what needs to be returned is not just a nature of qualitative feelingness; it's a nature suffused with norm.
That's right, because what would solving that even solve? To my mind, nothing, right? Nothing. And this is why that brand of panpsychism is like super uninteresting to me, right? Or it doesn't solve the problem. It relocates a problem I'm not even really interested in to begin with, right? That's the way I would describe a lot of modern panpsychism. It relocates a problem that I'm not really interested in to begin with, rather than solves it, right? Yeah, spot on, 100%.
And so. Like this is why I say, and I think, Aristotle, Plato, Aquinas, all your faves, right? All my faves, They're panpsychists, but they're not panpsychists in like this contemporary sense of, hey, you know, we got
electrons got feels.
Yeah, electrons got feels. No, they're panpsychists in that nature is minded in the normative sense. Nature is the space of reasons. Nature is in the space of reasons, right? And what I would say, the more relevant to Marcuse is someone like Goff. So Marcuse's point is like he's saying like we need a kind of like panpsychic view of reality, right, to restore normativity, and that's what's going to be what will provide us ultimately with the resistance to incorporation into the machine, right? But what do you have in someone like Goff, a socialist who wants to be a panpsychist? This is the incorporation of panpsychism into the machine. This is a very safe panpsychism. It doesn't provide us with a normative teleological critique of anything. It just says, yeah, okay, it turns out like, you know, tastes like chocolate, feels like sex is written to the electrons.
Right. And somehow they unify, right? This is
that's not a call to revolution, right? That's a call to the status quo.
It is. Yeah, it definitely is, right? Because you know, I mean, so many of these panpsychists are naturalists, right? They know that they got to keep their seat at the lunch table, right?
Yeah.
Within the sort of you know that crowd, right? Yeah. So they're not being revolutionary, of course not, because they know if they are, then they're not going to have a seat at the lunch table. I mean, the one guy who tried to be a little bit revolutionary, Nagel. Remember what they did to that poor guy, man? Man, they slandered that dude's name. Yep. Here's an atheist, right, who comes out to actually dare question the prevailing narrative of neo-Darwinism and reductionism, and does so quite rigorously. I would contend.
And if I can wrap on Nagel, because this is an important point, because I show that that's one of like the last real men in contemporary philosophy.
Agreed.
Right? Okay. A man with chest, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If you read Mind and Cosmos, right?
Right, Mind and Cosmos.
And you read his book, The Last Word, okay, especially The Last Word. That's the one I actually think is the more important book. It is not. I mean, he's famous for what it's like to be a bat, right? The Qualia problem. If you read those two books, the big problem for Nagel is the loss of normative rational structure.
It's about directedness, right?
It's about directedness, right? It's about The Last Word. It's about rationality. It's about directedness, right? And the idea there is no non-directed rationality, right? That's why, like, I think, and like Nagel's panpsychism would be something, and he even mentions Aristotelianism as an option for his.
That's right.
His way of modeling panpsychism, right? And I think he gets it. Right?
Yeah, but I mean, the comments that came out, you know, just infantile, man. Yeah. If anybody is still under a delusion that professional philosophers, scientists, people in the academy are anything generally more than what you'll see at a high school lunch table, please get over that, right? Yeah. Just see what happens when people question the status quo, and you'll be reminded of the high school lunch table, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, and here's a point. I mean, I don't mean just to pick on, Goff, but although, hey, let's go. Anyway,
certainly welcome to come defend his view anytime.
Yeah, right. And I do actually think Rogan kind of ran rings around him, but anyway, this guy Marcuse, right? The woke guy. He is saying what the problem is we have a philosophy of nature and a philosophy of mind that has like torn normative structure out of nature. Okay. Right. Do you see that? And the thesis of this book is, don't forget the cunning of capital R reason, right? Like this sort of like modern reason, to take its own criticisms and incorporate it into useful idiot ways. Okay. And so what do you have in something like panpsychism as in its contemporary form? It is a surface questioning of the turn to minority, to the turn to modern reason in and of itself. But what is it really, though? It is ultimately just an incorporation of the critique into the status quo.
Yes.
It's the same move Marcuse is predicting everywhere else. And I think Marcuse himself has suffered this dialectical twist, right? And it's really clear like people like Goff are themselves suffering that same dialectic.
Look, it's hard to beat the Terminator, guys.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. And by the way, we're doing some philosophical 3D chess up here today.
Man, that was great. I'm having an absolute blast with this one. And this has been really, really fruitful. Let's take a few comments and questions.
Yeah, I went off there. I'm sorry.
But we wait for that. That's what we That's why the people show up.
We're gonna have a short of like Pat rants and Jim rants, right?
Yeah. By the way, gentle listeners, we do have a somebody who might be working on little highlight snippets of this, so stay tuned for maybe some extra content, on the channel, and shorter form content.
Should have like a philosophy for the people, hold my beer moments. Right?
That's good. I like that. Yeah. Brendan says, why would anyone think they aren't connected to any nature?
One, this is really big picture, but what is the fundamental, like human failing? Like we could be like gods if we could just control this thing, right? And so the idea of like I'm disconnected from nature because then I can stand over it and run it, right? We're talking this is the fall, right? This is
original sin, right?
This is original sin, right? This is the fundamental human failing, right? Is this idea that no, I should run nature. But if I'm to say I should run it, it would seem to say I'm not it, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that can never be you, my friends. So yeah, that's where Christianity just gets it right. If only people could get Christianity right, they'd see this, right?
And I don't doubt that, like like a good Muslim is going to tell you much the same thing, right? Or like a good Hindu is going to tell you that much the same thing too, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't
know enough of those traditions, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, Muhammad was a despicable caravan raider, historically, but anyway, we'll do a conversation on that. Right. JC Beats says, beyond this topic, I would love you guys to do a video on Hegel. Jim seems to be pretty into Hegel. Oh, he is.
Oh yeah.
We do have a series planned at some point on Hegel.
I think what we'll do because I think this is the best place to go with Hegel is we'll just do a close read of the introduction of the phenomenology of spirit.
Sweet.
Right. If we did any other text by Hegel, it's gonna be like a multi-year project, right? Okay, but I think we could do a responsible introduction to Hegel by reading the introduction to the phenomenology of spirit.
Yeah. I was thinking the other day, I would actually love maybe once a year, once every other year, because Philosophy for the People is forever, to just do Plato's Republic.
Yeah, no, we should go back to it.
I agree. Yeah.
Same way we're advising people they should go back to it. We should then like a couple years from now go back and just like even leave the original Plato series up. And
totally.
Do it again. Say, hey, here's what we've learned. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, we already got a pre-order for our bucket of prime matter.
Nice.
So it's coming, guys. Get ready for your Philosophy for the People supplement line. Prime matter. Soylent Green. I got some hookups that might be able to let us throw our label on there. So support the show. All right, last one here, and then we're going to call this. Brendan says, my generation became defined by how we felt, and that was continually reinforced growing up. With what you guys are saying about normativity, sounds like that wasn't great advice. What do you think here, Jim?
It was not.
Right.
Yeah, it was not. But I mean, I think I don't know how old Brendan is. I don't want to do too much iGen bashing here because I mean yours was not the first generation, right? To be raised on feeling, right? So
yeah,
I mean, you can find speaking of Hegel, you find Hegel like really bitching about the romantic generation in the introduction of phenomenology of spirit.
Well, dude, I just you probably didn't see this, Jim, but I did a short where I just read one of Adler's essays called "Invitation to the Pain of Learning." Yeah. And in 1941, he's complaining about essentially this, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to actually understand what learning is, what education is, which is inherently painful. Everybody wants to make it a game. Everybody wants to make it fun. Which means that nobody learns, nobody gets educated, right? So, yeah, this isn't exactly a new thing of softness, just general softness and feelingness and stuff like that, right? But it is a problem.
You can see, look at Plato and Aristotle's treatments of education in the Republic and in the Politics. You can find much the same thing, much the same worry. Yeah.
Right. Sweet. Okay. Before we wrap this up, Jim, any announcements on your end?
No, I don't think so. We'll be, I'm sure we'll be back soon with more either Marxist Monday or Woke Wednesday.
We got Freaky Friday this week.
Freaky Friday, yeah. Might have to do it at an odd time, but we should be able to do it.
Yeah, we'll make it happen for you people. Yeah. All right, gentle listeners, please do like, share, subscribe. Get ready to buy that bucket of prime matter, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Soylent Green is